debate over what to call the terrorism that we have all seen. And Donald Trump uses the word radical Islam. That is something that some leaders in Europe also use. President Barack Obama does not want to use those words. He says it's not helpful. From where you sit, is it fair to call the broader issue that we're seeing radical Islamic terror or not?
Yes, it is extremism. It's truly extremism, Islamic extremism, which is something we have to confront, and we have to correct the religious discourse. I'm a Muslim person, and it is very, very difficult for me to say this thing, but it is the reality. It's very important to state this fact in order to confront it. There are other reasons that we need to deal with. Political reasons, also economic reasons, cultural reasons. But in Egypt, we have an initiative to correct the religious discourse so that we purify that rhetoric from all erroneous thoughts which have been employed in a context. That context leads to violence, killing, and sabotage and destruction.
استخدامها في سياق. السياق ده يؤدي إلى العنف والقتل والتخريب والتدمير.
On the human rights issue, obviously, Egypt, you have come under great criticism for that. Why do you feel Egypt is being misunderstood on this issue?
Let me tell you, while we're discussing this issue, that one of the reasons for that understanding is that when we talk about confronting extremism and terrorism phenomenon and violence resulting from it in Egypt, there must be tough security measures. You guys isolate that and you deal with it from a human rights perspective only. We appreciate that and respect it, because we are responsible for the Egyptian people, whom I consider my own family. How could I be comfortable knowing that there could be a human rights violation against these people? However, don't you forget or separate the confrontation of terrorism and extremism which is taking place and just shed light on it from a human rights violations point of view. For example, in Sinai, if we allowed violations during that campaign, it wouldn't have lasted more than 2 years up till now. To put it under control, reduce dangers, and get rid of the extremists there. Because during that campaign, we were keen on not letting it impact or hurt the innocent civilians who live in Sinai area, specifically. What happens here is that they completely isolate that reality and look at it as human rights violations in Egypt. And that's not correct.
في منطقة سيناء على تحديدا يعني. فهنا اللي بيحصل ان هم بيفصلوا خالص الواقع ده ويبصوا لك في تجاوز في حقوق الانسان في مصر.
Let me add one more thing. I came to this country in 1981 to take a course, and I noticed that the security procedures back then were light and comfortable. That's because there was no danger. And then I visited the United States again in 2004 on another mission, and I found that it was completely different, and I found the security measures in place were much tougher and more complicated. If we compare that with the way it used to be, we may conclude that there is lack of respect for human rights in America. However, because of the awareness of the American people and their understanding that this is necessary to fend off a bigger danger that American citizens may face as a result of terrorism, they accepted those security measures very simply, and they did not call them violations of human rights.
قبل هذه الإجراءات بمنتهى البساطة ولم توصف بأنها إجراءات ضد حقوق الإنسان.
Part of the reason there's so much criticism, Amnesty International says several people a day are taken into custody in Egypt without being charged, and your own government figures say that 12,000 people in just the first 10 months of last year were arrested specifically on terrorism charges in Egypt. Human rights groups say, of course, those numbers are much higher. We spoke to one young man in the Wadi al-Natrun prison, and he was in there, he was charged. He said ISIS was recruiting inside that prison, and he said it helped in part by inhumane conditions inside that jail. The criticism is out there that your government is creating more terrorists by putting people in jail without charging them, by the conditions in the jails being bad, by more jails opening. What do you say to that?
The answer is very simple. Those who commit terror here, was it America that made them terrorists? Those who commit terror in France, is it France that made them terrorists? Those who committed terror in Brussels, Was it Brussels that made them terrorists? This is twisting of reality, as a matter of fact.
الحقيقة.
President Sisi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Actually, I thank you and thank the American people for bearing with me during this interview of mine. And I hope that I have added something towards understanding what's happening in our region and the extremely serious issue of terrorism and extremism and their impact on security and stability, not only in the Middle East, but around the globe. I thank you and thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The biggest economic challenges, of course, is terrorism. It has affected tourism so dramatically, with numbers from the government as it's off by about 50% earlier this year. I mean, given how important that is for Egypt, obviously it's central for you. I want to just ask you about a news story. Most recently, we all saw the horrible coverage of Egypt Air Flight 804, which contributed to fear among some to travel to Egypt. At this time, do you still believe that terror was to blame for that jet going down?
الحقيقة احنا بنجري تحقيقات.
As a matter of fact, we are conducting a wide range of investigations in that regard, and we are studying all possibilities. And it's still too early at this point to determine the real reason behind the crash of the Egyptian plane. But I want to tell you anyway that the impression which has been formed about Egypt in the last 3 or 4 years about the instability has had a very big impact on tourism, and this has had a great negative impact on the amount of foreign currency that comes into Egypt from that sector.
حجم العملة الحرة اللي كان ممكن تدخل لمصر من هذا القطاع.
Of course, that jet was the second to go down in Egypt in a year. The Russian Metrojet, of course, was related to ISIS in the Sinai, where you have been successfully fighting ISIS. Can you really recommend that tourists come back to Egypt right now?
احنا لن نقول للسياح.
We would never invite tourists or anyone else to visit us in Egypt if there was any danger to their lives, whether during their flights to Egypt or during the time they spend in Egypt. We also would like to invite all countries who wish to check more on our procedures to send to committees to inspect the security procedures that we conduct in our airports in Egypt, or the different security measures that we take to secure different sites of tourism.
المقاصد السياحية المختلفة.
You have been fighting extremism, you have been fighting ISIS. The French defense minister is now saying ISIS terrorists from Libya could be a threat, that they could flee from Libya to places like Egypt. How many members of ISIS do you think are in Egypt right now?
خليني أقول لك أنا.
Let me first tell you that I have a major reservation against confining the term terrorist to Daesh only. Terrorists and extremists are not only Daesh, and this is very important because that label has been put only on Daesh, and this is incorrect. We believe that all terrorists and extremists are dangerous. Those who use terrorism, violence, destruction, and killing to accomplish their goals. This is the answer. In Egypt, we are exerting very big efforts to provide security.
احنا بنبذل جهود أمنية ضخمة جدا في هذا الإطار.
How big is the terrorist problem in Egypt right now? How many people do you think are extremists?
السؤال مش في مصر.
The question is not only about Egypt. The question is about terrorism in the whole globe. How many in Nigeria? How many in Somalia? How many in Mali? How many in Iraq? How many in Afghanistan? How many in Pakistan? How many in Yemen? How many in Libya? How many in Syria? Not Egypt. In Egypt, we are making efforts and we are capable of accomplishing security and stability against such elements. But it's not only about Egypt. The thing is, this phenomenon is present and spreading worldwide, and unless we all unite and there be a clear international effort against it, the world will suffer from this phenomenon for many years to come.
في مواجهتها العالم هيتألم من هذه الظاهرة لسنين طويلة قادمة.
Do you think the United States is providing the leadership needed right now to fight the war on terror?
في جهد كبير بيتبذل.
There is a big effort being made, but the problem is way too big, and the challenges are huge.
When you say huge and monumental, do you think that this is something we are going to be fighting for years, for decades? When you think about the scope of the war as a military leader, how do you see it?
أنا للأسف شايف إن هي
Unfortunately, I believe that this is going to take many years, because the danger started many years ago, and there was warning against it, but no adequate precautions were taken. I'll give you an example. 2.5 years ago, during the United Nations General Assembly, I warned against allowing those elements to use social media sites and takfiri sites to disseminate that ideology among youth and to recruit youth and to turn them into instruments for killing and destruction in the places where they live, whether those places were inside the Islamic world or outside of it. And until now, this matter has not been dealt with seriously enough. Those sites, very simply, are being used to spread extremist ideology and to manipulate young people's minds with wrongful thoughts and turn them into fighters and assign them to tasks of killing and sabotage. This is happening at this moment as I'm talking to you right now.
ويتم تكليفهم بمهام للقتل والتخريب حتى وأنا بكلمك حتى الآن.
Do you think then that companies like Twitter, like Facebook, like Google need to do more to fight this war?
Sure. This is not a restriction of freedom at all. The danger is too big. Look at the map of extremism and terrorism around the globe. Is it growing or retreating? Look at the amount of suffering inflicted on people by that ideology and this dangerous parasite. What we are saying is that these sites must be closed right away so that they are not used to spread that ideology around the globe.
President Sisi, thank you so much. You're here at the UN meeting with world leaders, obviously not a formal meeting with President Obama. The U.S. has resumed $1.3 billion in annual military aid to Egypt. Is the United States giving you what you need right now in your war against ISIS?
Let me first offer my greetings to the American people, and I wish to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak through CNN to them. The question really is not whether or not the United States is giving us enough aid to fight against ISIL, because the thing is, when it's carried out, it's the result of a discussion and a dialogue about the requirements to defend Egypt's security and stability.
عن مصر والمتعلقة بالأمن والاستقرار ومحاربة.
Fighting terrorism is a new element or factor to the aid program. So we talk and discuss those issues, and the military committees sit down to identify the requirements, and they are dealt with positively.
عشان تحدد المطالب وبيتم التعامل معها بإيجابية.
This week you have been speaking at the UN. You have had several very significant meetings, including meetings with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. You are the first leader of the Muslim world that has met with Donald Trump, the leader of the most populous Arab country, such a crucial country. What was your impression of Donald Trump?
My impression about both meetings was really wonderful.
Donald Trump, what was he like in your meeting? Do you think that he would make a strong leader?
No doubt.
So one of the things, of course, that's so important about meeting with Donald Trump as being the first leader in the Muslim world to meet with him is, of course, he has said he will ban Muslims from entering the United States. This week he's talked specifically about extreme vetting and said that he won't allow people to come to the United States, Muslims from countries that aren't capable of carrying out that vetting. Did you and Donald Trump talk about his Muslim plan?
The United States in general conducts very strict security measures for everyone who wishes to visit it, which has been in place for quite a few years. It's also important to know that during election campaigns, many statements are made and many things are said. However, afterwards, governing the country would be something different and would be subject to many factors.
It sounds like you think Donald Trump is saying what he needs to say to be elected, but that he might not follow through with the plan.
I don't want to be unfair to anyone here. During election campaigns, there is a perception that could be based on a certain vision and point of view. then that vision or point of view gets corrected and it develops as a result of governing experience, reports and advice from experts.
أمر آخر مختلف.
You also had a chance, I know, to meet with Hillary Clinton this week. You've known her, obviously, you've met her before. Second time you've met her since you took over as president of Egypt. You saw her and Bill Clinton at the Clinton Global Initiative here in New York just 2 years ago. Do you think Hillary Clinton would make a good president?
الأحزاب هنا
Political parties here would not allow candidates to reach that level unless they are qualified to lead a country the size of the United States of America.
Clinton has spoken about you. In fact, in a debate earlier in the primary with Bernie Sanders, she had this to say.
We saw what happened in Egypt. I cautioned about a quick overthrow of Mubarak, and we now are back with basically an army dictatorship.
What do you say to that?
أنا هجاوب السؤال.
I will answer this question in two ways. I believe that Mrs. Clinton didn't make that statement after our most recent meeting. But also in Egypt, there can't be a chance for any dictatorship. Because in Egypt, there is a constitution, there is law, and there is the will of the Egyptian people, which will not allow any leader to remain in their position for any period past their term, which is 4 years.
And on this issue, have you decided whether you will stand for re-election in 2018?
Let's pass these 4 years first. The challenges in Egypt are so many. And by the way, you have to understand that the will of the Egyptian people is what counts. Many people need to learn that about us in Egypt.
I want to talk about some of the challenges. Obviously, last year the economy grew at 4%. An enviable rate for almost any country. Obviously now, though, there are a lot of challenges. Youth unemployment is high, inflation is in double digits, and you're renegotiating that crucial loan from the IMF. You have said you're going to eliminate subsidies, which obviously help many very poor Egyptians, but are very difficult to afford now, perhaps impossible. Can you promise international investors that those subsidies are going away?
أنا بوعدهم إن في
I promise them that there is a state that's serious about economic reform and serious about tackling challenges efficiently without impacting the poor. There is a big difference between eliminating subsidies and correcting subsidies so that they reach the poor. In Egypt, subsidies are given to all classes of Egyptians without any differentiation. Both the rich and the poor receive subsidies similarly. It might even be that the rich receive more subsidies than the poor. Because, for example, when we subsidize automobile gasoline or electricity, we are in fact subsidizing the rich more than the poor. So what we are trying to accomplish is rationalization of subsidies so that the people who are more needy get some protective measures.
يتم عمل إجراءات حماية لهم.
And what is the biggest economic challenge you face right now?
Population growth. We grow by almost 2.5% annually. That's almost 2.5 million per year. So every 4 years we increase by 10 million.
إحنا في أول السنة كنا 90.
In the beginning of the year we were 90 million. Last month we've become 91 million. By the end of the year we'll be 92.5 million, approximately. For this number of people you would need education, health care, you will need job opportunities, you will need housing, and you will also need to feed them.
وعايزة كمان طعام ليهم.
And obviously that is a crucial issue for you, and an urgent one, given the terror pressures that you have in Egypt. What are you doing specifically to help the young men in Egypt, the young men that unemployment is perhaps 40+%, to help provide opportunity for them in Egypt so that they can provide for their families and so that some of them do not turn to extremism?
Let me first correct that figure. We don't have a 40% unemployment. That figure is not correct. When I first took office, the number was 13.8%.
I'm referring specifically to youth unemployment. A youth unemployment that's an estimate is that it's much higher.
Please allow me to tell you that the young people in Egypt under the age of 40 are 60 million. And as for the job market, as a matter of fact, we have to provide more than 600,000 jobs a year. This is not an easy task for any country in the world to provide that number of job opportunities for that number of people. But we are making a very big effort in that regard. We are trying to encourage investment and to attract investors from within Egypt and outside of Egypt.
وجذب المستثمرين من مصر